In this lesson, we're going to be talking about multiplying positives and negatives together. So what are the rules for multiplying signs together? Every two negatives multiplied will cancel, right? So they kind of undo each other. So if you multiply a whole bunch of them together, you're really looking for an even number of negatives. If you have an even number of negatives, they all kind of cancel each other away, and it turns into a positive. If you have an odd number of negatives, not that the numbers are odd, but the number of negatives is odd, then they won't perfectly pair up and cancel each other away. So you're still going to be left with a negative. So it has nothing to do with the size of the number or anything like that. It's purely just how many negatives multiplied together. All right. So in short, if you multiply a positive times a positive, you're getting a positive. If you multiply a negative times a negative, you're getting a positive because two negatives will cancel. And then if you multiply a negative times a positive or a positive times negative, where you only have one negative, that's when you're going to get a negative. Okay, so let's go through a couple problems. So I like to personally determine the sign first. So determine sign, then multiply. Okay, just otherwise I feel like I'll forget. I'll just kind of put the number together and not pay attention to the signs. So I start with a negative times a negative is going to be a positive. So even if you want to make sure that you remember that you took care of the signs, you can say a negative times a negative, they turn into positives. So then it's just 12 times 2, which is 24. All right, 10 times 3, positive times positive is just a positive. Okay. And then some different examples. So we have negative times a positive. So you don't have a second negative to cancel it. So that's going to be a negative. And then 3 times 25 is like 3/4, 75 cents. Negative 75. Negative times a positive is negative. 5 times 7 is 35. Here, I like to start with what's my sign going to be? I have a positive times a negative times positive. I only have one negative. I don't have an even number of them. So my final answer is going to be negative. And then I just want to multiply it together. A lot of different ways to do this. If you want to do 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 6 is 48. Or you want to do 2 times 6 is 12. 12 times 4 is 48. Or if you want to do 4 times 6 is 24. Times 2 is 48. But it'll all take care of itself. Over here, you have a negative times a negative, which is a positive. So I like to cancel those away. And then 4 times 5 I'll do first because I can get a 20 out of that. And 20 times something is a lot easier to do than some of the other numbers. So 20 times 3 would get me a 60. All right. Here I have a negative times a negative times a negative. So 2 of them would cancel, but the third will still be there. So there's that odd number of negatives. And then I just kind of multiply it together. So like here, I wouldn't do 2 times 8 and get 16 times 3. I don't know how I can't do that in my head very well. But this route's okay. So 8 times 3 is 24 times 2 is 48. Or even 2 times 3 is 6 and 6 times 8 is 48. Okay. If you are putting this stuff in the calculator, please be careful with how you put it in the calculator. So again, remember that there is a negative button on your calculator, and it's that one. So you need to use that, not that. That is programmed to be a subtraction, not a negative. So if you are doing a negative, it's probably safer to take, whether they have parentheses or not, it's safer to put parentheses around your try that again, negatives within parentheses. That way there's some order of operation stuff that's going to happen, and this is a safer route. So whether it has that or not. So I'm going to put parentheses around the negative 2, and then I don't have to put a time sign between it. It understands, it's programmed to know that that's multiplication. So negative 8 and then negative 3. All right, so then that's just going to multiply them all together and get you negative 48. Okay. Here we have a negative times negative times negative times negative. So every two of them will cancel. So those two will cancel. Those two will cancel. And then we just have 12 times 2. The 1 didn't do anything other than there was a negative associated with it. But as far as multiplying, not signs, we have 12 times 2 is 24. All right, I can instantly see it doesn't matter what that is because whatever it is times 0 is just going to be 0. So save yourself some time, and if you recognize that, that'll make things a little bit nicer. Here, this will be 0, but the order of operations are you going to do your multiplication before you do your addition. So I'll multiply this and get a negative 10, multiply that, get a 0, and then negative 10 plus 0 is going to give me a negative 10. All right. We'll evaluate with some powers. So we have, well, let's see. One big thing about this is as you go through it is you have exponents, right? So then that means 4 to the third, which is 4 times 4 times 4. You definitely can throw that into a calculator. We're going to do that on most of them. But I want to make sure that you're careful, especially when negatives get in here, because that answer is going to be different than that answer. But these two won't be. And there's something to why that is. Okay, so you don't play the game of trying to figure out when does it matter, when does it not matter, whether I put parentheses in. Just put parentheses. Don't be lazy on it. Otherwise, you're going to get caught on some things. Okay, so 4 to the third, let's just type it in the calculator. 4 to the third is 4. There's your arrow, there's your exponent button. 4 to the third is 64. Zero to the eighth, 0 to any power is just going to be 0 because it's a bunch of zeros multiplied together. And then here it's a bunch of 4s multiplied together, get 64. Here it's a bunch of negative 2s multiplied together. So remember that means negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2. That's the long way to think of it. Where this problem is a negative, but it's not the negative that's repeating, it's the 2 that's repeating. So the parenthesis matters. Okay, so here anything in the parentheses is everything. There's 4 of exactly that. Here there's 4 2s multiplied together with an extra negative kind of tacked on afterwards. So you'll see when you type this stuff in that if I do negative 2 raised to the 4th with parentheses, I get a positive 16 because there's 4 negatives multiplied together. So there's an even amount versus negative 2 raised to the 4th. I get a negative because it's 4 2s and 1 negative afterwards. Okay, so there's definitely a difference between them. Please be careful. Basically, don't be lazy on it and you won't get caught. So that one equals positive 16 and this one equals negative 16. Okay, but I said that these two are going to be a little bit different because it's an odd number. That's the only reason. So here you have 5 negative 3s multiplied together. Here you have 5 3s multiplied together with a negative. So if you take 5 negative 3s, you're going to get a negative answer because it's an odd number of negatives. So negative 3 to the 5th, negative 243. And then here, it's doing 3 to the 5th and then tacking a negative on. So you get the same answer. So like I said, I wouldn't play the game of trying to figure out when that negative is going to happen and when it's not. I would just, if it has parentheses on it, put parentheses on it on the calculator, and then you don't have to worry about it. Okay. And then good news is division is going to work exactly the same as multiplication. You're still going to divide, but we're going to figure out your signs first because you have a negative divided by a negative or whatever the situation is. So a negative divided by a negative here is negative 8 divided by negative 2. Negative divided by a negative is a positive, and then it's 8 divided by 4, which is positive. 8 divided by 2, which is 4. Positive divided by positive is positive. 10, positive divided by a negative is a negative, and then 10 divided by 2 is 5. Negative divided by a positive is negative. 9 divided by 1 is just 9. And then negative 3 divided by 0 is not 0. Okay, these are absolutely different things. So if we throw this in the calculator, you do negative 3, and the negative really doesn't have anything to do with it. Negative 3 divided by 0. It's the divide by 0 is the problem. You can't do it. You can't divide by 0. It's mathematically impossible. That's actually called undefined. Doesn't exist. So you cannot divide by 0. And it's not like it'll all of a sudden happen in a later class. Like you literally can't divide by 0 ever. Okay, so, but the other way is, because you're trying to see how many times, dividing is kind of a breaking things up into groups. So if you're taking a 10 divided by a 2, you're trying to figure out if you have 10 and you're putting them into groups of 2, how many groups would you have? You'd have 5. So if you're taking 3 and you're putting them into groups of 0, you can't. It's impossible. But here, if you take 0 and you're putting them into groups of 3, you actually get 0. And the negative on that doesn't matter because 0 is not positive or negative. All right. So that was a whole bunch of problems involving multiplying and dividing. Most importantly, we are dealing with signs. And that's it.